Yes, welcome to the Trump Report. Some might say the series finale of the Trump Report. And, a lot of times we'll start off with some jokes, but we have something to talk about in a little bit that's so much funnier than anything that I'm not going to speak for Tamra, but anything that I've ever written. It's so much funnier than anything I'm capable of. So I think we'll save the comedy to all be packed into that topic. Hi, I'm Christian Blatt, joined by Tamra Brown.
Hi.
And the S-Man himself, Scott Moore. The last time we did the show was on election night, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, it was basically a week ago.
We were so young. We were so young. We were so naive then.
I know.
Yep.
There was so much fraud yet to be perpetrated.
Right.
There were so many ballot dumps from Maricopa County since then, and they're still not done. But when we left things off, previously on the Trump Report, I felt fairly confident that it wasn't going to be figured out that night, but I had many indications that President Trump had gotten reelected. It felt too much like 2016, and even in retrospect, the polling didn't do us any favors. When last we were here, I was fairly confident of that, but I wanted to know, I'll ask you first, Tamra, where you were, expectation-wise, optimism. What were you thinking?
Well, as you both know, I was pretty down the last time we recorded because it was feeling very 2016, but it was not only a mere couple hours later, actually, that things really did start to turn around. It was late Tuesday night. And I don't even think it was midnight yet when they started to put things in perspective of which counties were the ones, slowest to be counted, were all blue counties. And then things started looking up.
Yeah, that is the point when the Democrats began rigging the election in such a way that they not only did not take over the Senate, but they actually lost quite a few seats in the House. So that's why I think we need to realize that when Democrats rig an election, they are not very good at it. They only thought to rig it for president. They didn't rig it in any other way. And before we move on to that, Scott, what were your thoughts last Tuesday, which was election night, when we last spoke?
What are my thoughts since then? Or...
No. At that moment, like as we were, maybe even that evening after we did the show and, went back and looked at some more returns and such.
Oh, I felt comfortable that Biden had it. That he definitely had it in the bag. Just knowing what was left to be counted in Michigan at the time, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, knowing where those votes were going to come from. I think the biggest surprise was seeing the numbers start to creep up in Georgia and thinking like, oh my God, he actually has a chance of flipping Georgia blue again in the first time in 26 years. And the Arizona number was high, and I still think he's going to win Arizona, even though the number has definitely tightened up. But even back then, I was like, he's got that as well.
Yeah, the call for Arizona was my favorite thing on election night because Fox News called it, and I think we talked a little bit about it. Yeah. It happened even before we did the show.
Because I was quite surprised at the professionalism of Fox News. They were fair and balanced, let's say.
By the way, the daytime part of Fox News has been fair and balanced. The evening time has been sort of a waste paper basket inside of a trash can, inside of a dumpster, in a county landfill, all on fire. But the daytime has been fairly impressive.
Oh yeah, the daytime is the best, I think, and as far as not only the news gathering, but their election desk is really, really, really good. I mean, as we were talking about, 2012 is when they called Ohio for President Obama and his reelection. They are solid when it comes to that. They're solid in their news desk. They're solid with their polls. They're definitely their daytime's one of the best for sure, and then nighttime it becomes something like you said, just
all Ingraham
but
and
there was
Hannity and
amateur hour.
But and by the way, earlier tonight, Laura Ingraham
Tucker
said the words President-elect Biden. Now, she had some other crazy shit after that, but Laura Ingraham said President-elect Biden tonight.
Did she do this?
No, I didn't see it. It was like a tweet and a screen grab. So allegedly, I have to say, I guess, because I didn't actually see it. So we'll get a couple things in here. Sam Whitfield, who has a show that I think is called the Whitfield Report, great friend of my network, the Blackcast Network, fan of Dennis Miller Option. He would say, I wouldn't be calling it a final episode yet, Mr. Blatt. No, I mean, it's there's always the name of this show has evolved over time. It was originally called Trump versus Hillary. And by the way, tonight, 4 years ago, was the Trump versus Hillary finale. It was the day after Election Day. And that was the after show. The actual election night show, we had 5,000 people watching. Somewhere in here, I came across it. There, I did a little screen grab of it from that night. So that was kind of an interesting thing to see. Sort of going back to so that was some interesting symmetry there. But to Sam's point. And we have to, of course, shout out Storage Yard Resident, who is our most loyal devotee.
Mm-hmm.
There's
diva and devotee.
Yeah, a little bit of a diva. Yeah, if you ever saw his rider, because of his political affiliation, he insists on only red M&Ms. And if there is a single blue M&M in there, he walks, and you know what? That is integrity, and I appreciate that, Storage Yard Resident. Look. There are a lot of feelings from you. So you have your conservatives that I've talked to who are very disappointed, but they are ready to turn the page on kind of an unfortunate time. And then you have everyone who is letting themselves get whipped up into a frenzy by people who are not Donald Trump, because Donald Trump we haven't seen since last Thursday. Publicly, and that was the speech that led to Anderson Cooper referring to him as an obese turtle.
Hilarious.
Is funny, but somebody probably reminded him, this isn't New Year's Eve with Kathy Griffin. You are a news anchor. Maybe save it for Anderson after hours. So it is a very funny line, but that I was winning until they started counting more ballots. I was winning until they started counting the ones that I wasn't winning, and it was a little that moment was a little sad. So since then he's played golf twice, and credit to the AP photographer who had the super zoom on the camera that got the moment when he was told that the election had been called for Joe Biden.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, he's got like his club over his shoulder.
Yep,
and there's a shot of him in the car later, and I feel like it has to be Photoshopped because his eyes are red and it looks like he's been crying. I'm like, there's no way that's real. I don't think he has that emotion. I don't think that's how he handles it. But the reason why, the sort of circuitous route I'm taking in all of this is that I know there are some of you, and Sam, you might very well be one of them, who feel that, and look, I know somebody who's actively, sort of tertiarily, somebody that I've booked as a guest who is working at great length and like appeared at an event with this Richard Grinnell guy and is very dedicated to this cause of the legal challenges. And I will tell you who is not dedicated to the legal challenges. Donald Trump. He is not out there really trying to do much of anything about it. You'll get a lot of emails. Sam, you may have gotten them asking for money, and maybe you've sent some money. But if you read that email, do you know where your money is not going? Donald Trump's legal defense fund. It very clearly says that it is going to pay off his campaign debt, and now it's for his new PAC. He's starting a PAC now. So I think that there is no reason that you need to concede. There's no reason that you can't ask for recounts, but every legal challenge has been thrown out because you'll get quotes from the lawyers. There was my favorite one was they were complaining that they were not allowing the Republican observers at polling places in Pennsylvania. And in the course of the back and forth with the judge, the Trump lawyer said that there were non-zero Republican observers. And I'm not a legal genius, but non-zero means at least one. So the judge literally said, then I don't understand what you're asking for. And so there's a lot of other people have done the work of going in and looking at some of the stories, some of these reports. You had the people with the duffel bags going into Arizona polling places, and the duffel bags were filled with camera equipment because these were, media setting up. And a lot of these ballot counting rooms have live camera feeds. So there's a lot to see. And, I think that there's look, is there voter fraud in every election? Sure, to some extent. You're getting reports of, I forget what state it was now. It might have been Pennsylvania. There's an instance of somebody's dead mother's mail-in ballot was submitted, but the woman signed her name to it and didn't send in hers. So they're willing to just assume, okay, so she probably just thought that one was hers, and she sent, so she didn't send in two. So they have the signatures and they actually check them. And if anybody thinks that there's voter fraud in Nevada or Arizona, they are definitely playing the long game for the fraud. Arizona might not be done for by the way, the state that I trust the least is Alaska. Everybody knows Trump is going to win Alaska, but they're not even close. Like they're at like 8%. And yes, I'm joking. It's not at 8%, but they're not far, So anyway, I know that was a little bit of a meandering, but the legal challenges are, basically what lawyers do in a lot of cases is just to try to make things difficult for other people. But the only people they're making it difficult for is themselves, because they have the burden of proof. And in a lot of these races, it's like, oh, can you throw out 50,000 votes for some reason? Great. But like in Michigan, I think Biden's up by, I don't know, like 150. I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I don't want to try and get them just so I can be accurate. So, but I promised comedy, and I promise I'll also let Scott and Tamra react to all this. But it all leads up to the biggest tragedy of the 2020 election, which is Four Seasons Total Landscaping outside of Philadelphia. The press conference called by Rudy Giuliani that President Trump tweeted out as happening at the Four Seasons, then retracted the tweet and corrected it to Four Seasons Total Landscaping. It just moves me in so many ways that somebody could be so stupid. And God bless the people at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. They had to turn off their Yelp because they got too many joke reviews. But if you're interested in supporting great comedy, they have a merch tab on their website now. So you could get a Four Seasons Total Landscaping t-shirt or a cap or something. I know what all of my Christmas shopping is going to be this year. The reason why is not so much the name mix-up is funny, yes. But what's hysterical is that you hold a press conference across the street from a crematorium next to a dildo shop. God damn it, I could never do anything as funny as that. Rudy Giuliani you are a comedy mastermind. Your scene in Borat 2 was great, but you've outdone yourself. There is video of that press conference where they let Rudy know that the election had been called for Biden. And he was like, which network? All of them. All of them. And then he like immediately he does an about face of like, oh, the media, the media, the media. Christ, it was so funny. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack there, but it all is under the big umbrella of legal challenges. So, Tamra, between legal challenges and 4 seasons total landscaping, what are your thoughts?
Well, when the 4 seasons total landscaping news came out, I feel like the entire comedy world, like people who work in comedy, writers, performers, kept saying, this is what we call a hat on a hat. Like if you submitted a script with a losing candidate, then had to come up with a false story about where they're having a press conference, and it turns out the hotel was booked and they had to have it at a landscaping store between a dildo shop and a crematorium, your producer would say, no, you're allowed one convenience. We're not taking this is too convenient. Nobody had that been a fictional script, the audience would have been mad. Everybody would have thought that was just too cheesy to even be part of a sitcom. So that is how beyond just funny, but just so way too choreographed. They're their own worst enemies. And I did see a very funny tweet that total landscaping, it's between a dildo shop and a crematorium, or stuck between a cock and a charred place.
And the beauty of it, and I'm sharing this from this is from Gizmodo, but it was the one that came up first. This is a Getty Images photo, and you can see what they tried to do. They got all their signage up and they plastered it. And look, there's a lot of times to be critical of the media, but the media is doing their job here when they show the wide shot out around that. And what I was actually looking for that I haven't found is there have been those how it started and how it's going memes. There's the one that's how it started on the golden escalator and how it's going now, which is the total landscape, 4 seasons total landscaping. It cannot be overstated how amazing that moment is. Never letting go. Great comment here from Charlie Potatoes. It's literally something out of Veep. So yeah, it's Philadelphia native CNN's Jake Tapper has not let go of the fact of the very specific location of this. And if you follow him on Twitter, you'll see him post about it a lot. So Scott, same question. Obviously, there's the hysterical cherry on top, but this press conference was being held as I think NBC News was the first to call Pennsylvania and then the presidency for President-elect Biden. So your thoughts, you can talk about that, but I definitely want to get your thoughts on some of these legal challenges. Oh, you're still on mute, Scott. You got to, yeah.
What happened?
So,
there we go.
It's been flipping back and forth for whatever reason. I don't know why it's been doing that. It keeps knocking me off my AirPods. But I was going to say, like, to Tamara's point, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Like, who in the right mind would ever be able to even draw up something like that comedically and then be like, no, this is real? I mean, it's just insane. And I was telling a friend today on the phone that I'm like, if you don't believe that we're in a game simulation, now here's the proof that you need between that and the fact that we're now going to 2 runoffs in the state of Georgia to determine the Senate makeup by 1 tie-breaking vote with the new vice president. I mean, it's just like you could not write any of this stuff. And it's interesting. I've been listening to a podcast, which I'm glad, or a book that I'm glad I waited till after election. It's basically saying, "Will he go?" by Lawrence Douglas, and it's just talking about all the different things that Trump would do during the election and after the election. And some of the theories that this guy talks about, the author, are things that I could have seen happen, but I'm like, thank God I waited till after the election, because they were talking about, power outages in the city of Detroit. It knocked out, the ability for people to vote, and different like electors and how it would end up in the House of Reps, and could Vice President Pence be the tiebreaker in the Senate? I mean, all these crazy things, but I'm also in the back of my mind thinking, we're not there yet. We still have to get these electors certified. We have to get through the safe harbor date, and we have to send the slate of electors from each state. And so you still think in the back of your mind, would Republican legislatures in some of these states end up doing something like that and sending two different slates of electors? And it's still not completely out of the equation that something like that could happen, where you have a Democratic governor, let's say Michigan, and you have, Michigan's really a bad example at this point because, like you said, Biden won by like 130,000 votes. But let's say Pennsylvania, Democratic Governor Tom Wolf, Republican legislature. They both decide to certify, each other's, because there's still legal challenges going on. So you have the Democratic governor sending the slate of Biden electors, and you have the Republican legislature sending the Trump electors to DC. And then from January 6th, they have two different sets of electors. And now now it's basically thrown to Congress because neither candidate would have over 270. I think it's going to be a lot harder because Biden looks like he's going to win in Arizona, looks like he's going to pull off the win in Georgia with the recount, but those numbers are very tight. So you could see a world in which some of these states get peeled away somehow in recounts and in issues. And again, Georgia's a Republican state, Arizona's a Republican state. So you can see some of those things happening with Republican legislatures. Those people decide to throw it all away and say, "Hey, let's send these slate of electors to Washington and throw it to the House of Reps and to the Senate." So it's not a foregone conclusion in that sense, but it's not going to keep me up at night because I don't think that'll happen. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting time for sure until we can get past that date and get those electors sent to DC for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say something offensive, so I kicked myself out, I guess. But thanks for continuing on without me. I think that there's sort of the reality of where it could go. But I think that we're definitely a ways from that. And there, I think, are a lot of concerns when it gets to that point. But yeah, you do run into some of those issues. But the interesting thing that we've been seeing, of course, is, I was joking about Democrats not being smart enough to rig it for the House and Senate. There are races in some of these states where obviously they're very excited for. And look, Republicans had a great night, except for the top of the ticket. They had a tremendous night in the House. The night that lasted for a week because some of the margins were so thin, including in, Orange County, California, electing a Republican isn't a shocker, but, it was one that I think was called earlier today. So, it's definitely, I think, look, the Democrats thought that they were going to take over the Senate and shore up their majority in the House, and there's still a chance for the Senate. By the way, I think that the most 2020 thing to happen would be that the two Georgia runoffs are split, and Democrats win one and Republicans win the other, and it doesn't really do what anybody wanted, and you're even more divided. And if there's a 50-50 tie, is someone able to be called majority leader? Is a Democrat majority leader because they have the tiebreaker with the vice president? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, it's very tenuous because you have two independents that caucus with the Democrats anyway. So it's already a very, but yes, that's exactly what happened. I believe it was it Bush's first term, like later in or maybe it was the second term, where it was basically before the Democrats picked up more numbers, but it was down to like an independent again too, and they had the tiebreaker. the Democrats when it was Obama at the first term before he started losing everything, and it was just that tie-breaking vote. So yes, as long as you have, because the VP is the president of the Senate, so that would be the tiebreaker vote. So that therefore the Democrats would be in the majority at that point.
Right, and
the other thing that people aren't considering though is Joe Manchin, because even though you've got that block, let's say Georgia gets both, and they go Democratic, which would be a very huge if, because again, the time period of January and getting those voters out, it's going to be very difficult. But let's say theoretically they do, that still only gives you the tiebreaker vote, but you cannot lose a single Democrat. And Joe Manchin is definitely a very conservative Democrat in West Virginia, and has already talked about how he's against, getting rid of the filibuster and expanding the Supreme Court. So you lose that vote, that goes to the Republicans, and that already takes you out of the equation for a lot of big ticket items. So, even though we're talking about the Democrats maybe squeaking by the craziest thing ever by winning both seats and turning both Georgia senators Democratic, which is a huge challenge in itself, but you have to remember that you have to keep every single one of your Democratic members there to vote for you, or hope that Susan Collins or somebody crosses over to get that tiebreaker vote. So even if they do that, they have no padding at all, because they did not pick up some of those seats that they might have picked up that we all thought this time last week that they would, like North Carolina. We thought Tom Tillis was out. We thought, Susan Collins may have been out. We thought maybe in Iowa, maybe, Governor Steve Bullock, who's very popular in Montana, would have been able to take it over the top. So there were a lot of those states that didn't come through for the Democrats, and that's.
I was really hoping for Lindsey Graham to get out of there, but I thought that might happen.
Yeah, I really thought Susan Collins was gone. I thought this was the election that was going to take her over and out. But she was a very apt politician. She knows her state very well. She did not vote for Amy Coney Barrett, so that kind of gave her a little leverage to work with Maine. So she understands there. But again, she was somewhat unpopular too. So I am surprised that she pulled off the win there. And yeah, I agree with you, Tamara. I can't believe that that Lindsey Graham pulled it off. Although it's a very Republican state, I thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was. So that was a little bit of a bummer that Lindsey Graham won by such a large margin as well in South Carolina. Yeah. And to your point too, Christian, even though that we saw some pickups for Republicans in Orange County, again, Orange County went to Joe Biden. And this is by an even larger number than went for Hillary Clinton countywide. And that's the first time since the 30s that a presidential candidate has carried Orange County. So it was a little bit surprising to see some of these seats flip back to Republicans. And it's the first time since 1998 that a seat has switched back to Republicans in the state of California. So if you were to have asked me last Tuesday, I would not have expected that the House would have lost seats and that the Senate, we have not gotten the majority, because it felt like we were going to be on a pretty clean ride. And generally, a president gets their House and Senate the first 2 years. That's what Donald Trump had. That's what Barack Obama had. That's what George W. Bush had. So it is surprising that to start out of the gate that Joe Biden could technically have a very slim margin in both the House and not have the Senate. So it will be surprising.
And there's some connectivity issues going on. Some of to Scott's point. Democrats would be able to. Yeah, I know, I was gone too. There are some Republicans that Democrats would be able to work with in the Senate, and those would probably be the ones who've already congratulated Joe Biden. That would be Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse in particular. So there is a little bit of maneuverability in there, and it'll be interesting to see. But in a ways that sort of off in the distance. A couple of comments in the chat. Wanted to Sam Whitfield. I'd rather have the recount now so that both sides will be quiet. We had a 2-year in real life episode of The Americans with the Democrats questioning 2016. So I think this is only fair. I do think that there was a lot of focus on 2016 being stolen by foreign interference. There was a lot of focus on that. I think there was a certain point where it probably didn't need to have as much of an attention as it did. But you still had people who felt strongly about it. There's a lot of comparisons that we're hearing people throw around. Yeah, but what about Al Gore? What about what Al Gore did? Al Gore didn't concede until December 10th. But that was one state and as it turned out, 537 votes.
Yep.
Or as Joy
also-
Reid from MSNBC thinks, 538 votes, because she thought that that's why the 538 Nate Silvers was actually called 538. But of course, that's the total number of electoral votes. Nice try, Joy. But yeah.
But also, Al Gore
Go ahead.
didn't raise concerns before counting was even finished. I mean,
Yeah.
things were announced, and then he raised concerns. Trump was claiming fraud months in advance, and then as soon as Biden started to get slightly in his favor in 3 states, he was already saying this is a fraud. I mean, that's not the way that's handled.
Well, and there's 2 points to that, I would say, too. One is that are very different from now in 2016 and even 2000. I was in Florida in the year 2000. I voted for Al Gore in 2000. The difference is, to Tamra's point, was he wasn't bringing up fraud or anything else. He was saying, let's have every vote count. And the fact that it was so razor thin, and the fact that there were issues with the voting and the recounts that were going on in South Florida, and the issue that the state Supreme Court had said, yes, go back and count. And then the U.S. Supreme Court turned around and stopped it by a 5-4 vote. And it was so razor thin. And like you said, it was 271 to 266. I mean, that is as close as it gets. And again, Al Gore won the popular vote, not by as much. But then you fast forward to 2016, and part of the frustration was for Democrats was that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by nearly 3 million. And on top of that, she did not say fraud. She went and did a concession speech the very next day. 2 days later, Donald Trump is invited to the White House. What do we see with this president right now? Like Tamra says, he's been telegraphing fraud since months before the election, claiming that there's fraud, not conceding, not even allowing the GSA to be able to turn on the lights for the Biden-Harris transition and to start having office space and everything else that they need. And while he is doing this, he is furthering weakening the country, because now this transition period will have less of a time to be able to do what they need to do. So you can't even compare the difference between what Donald Trump and Republicans are doing now than what Democrats did in 2016 or what Al Gore did in 2000. They are night and day difference. And for anyone to even try to compare the two is clearly not quite on top of history and in politics, as they might say they are, or they're a huge Donald Trump fan.
Yeah, I think that there are such wide margins in these states, and you're seeing them getting closer in places like Arizona. But even so, it's still, I think, around 15,000 in Arizona. So it's gotten a little tighter in places like that. But some of them are very large margins, and these votes represent people who were afraid to go to their polling places. And the argument that, oh, look at all these votes, it couldn't possibly be 87% Biden, 13% Trump. But of course it could be in some of those counties. But also, when President Trump spent most of the year telling people that they can't vote by mail because it can't be trusted, so you weren't going to get a lot of those votes. And it's taking so long, especially in Pennsylvania, because the Republican legislature wouldn't let them start counting them early. Even like first thing in the morning, you should probably let them start counting them, So we talked a lot about this last Tuesday. So, the states where you got the mail-in votes first, and then you have the states like Pennsylvania. But I think that it's so much more layered than in 2000 in particular. And because that was the one state and the electoral votes are so close, it's at this moment, it looks like Joe Biden might win 306 electoral votes, which I remember in 2016, whomever won that election said 306 was a landslide. So I guess it means an electoral college landslide. I also know that winner said it was the largest electoral college win in years, but Obama just 4 years earlier actually had quite a few more. But anyway.
Yeah.
In any case, none of that's either here or there.
The largest Republican one, I would say, in years. That is true. That is definitely true.
There was a great Breitbart headline, which was somebody shared it on Twitter, which was that more people voted to reelect Donald Trump than I think any, the more people voted to reelect him than anybody else. The number of 70 million was higher. So that was what the headline was. It was just an interesting take on it.
Higher than what?
Than any other.
The number. So even like the number for like Reagan in '84, the number of votes was less votes.
But again, there's more people now, and the point is that
bigger.
5 million more people voted for Joe Biden. So
look, it's the pinned tweet on Ben Shapiro's Twitter. Facts don't care about your feelings, so please keep your facts out of here, Tamra.
But I was going to say, and the fact is that Joe Biden won by over 5 million, and that's going to be the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is the fact that not only will we get 306 electoral votes, but he's going to win the popular vote by 5-6 million, maybe close to 7 million.
And let's remember that Trump is still disputing that he lost the popular vote in 2016.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and all of this is groundwork he was laying in 2016 about how the election was going to be stolen from him then, and that there was rampant voter fraud. And in early 2016, he insisted that the was it the Iowa caucus or the New Hampshire primary, whichever one Ted Cruz run. He said that they should do. Yeah, it was Iowa that they needed to do a revote of the whole thing. And that was something that people were suggesting, like, your conservative commentators, of just like having the whole country vote over, just have a do-over because we didn't like the way that it went. And I think that it's a great moment for some people who have been largely silent to kind of get a jab in on President Trump. The Bush family could not have congratulated Joe Biden any faster. First, Jeb was so, aka low energy Jeb, was very quick to congratulate President-elect Biden, and former President George W. Bush was very quick to mention that he spoke with him, and in the statement mentioned that he was praying for him and also praying for President Trump as he prays for everyone. But it was, it was all in there. And, I think that say what you want about George W. Bush, but he stayed out of it during the actual voting, but more than happy to, sort of respectfully show his distaste for President Trump. You have a lot of world leaders congratulating President-elect Biden, not the president of Mexico, which is interesting, very interesting, considering the back and forth that there's been there. I think that they should just be glad that they're finally not going to have to pay for the wall, because they're this close to paying for that wall. But if Joe Biden's president, then they're not going to have to pay for the wall. And they're like, oh my God, what can we do with that? What can we do with that money?
Mexico's paying for the lawsuit. No, is that not happening?
Wow, that's a good question, actually. And Charlie Potatoes mentions that Jeb's slogan was, in fact, Jeb exclamation point. And I'm sorry I laugh at this, but it's funny. Still no word from Bush Sr. Okay.
It's not
that soon. And Sam, I'm in the latter category. I'll admit the issue with the ballot fraud is due to a large number of ballots being ticked just for Biden and no one else. So that is something I wanted to bring up, Sam. That comes up in every presidential election, in that you have a lot of people who quite honestly don't give a shit about anything else on the ballot.
Any other down
they
ballot.
Just know they're supposed to. Yeah, they don't vote for the down ballot stuff. I have a thing when I vote. If someone's running unopposed, I never vote for them. I hate that. I don't, they don't need my vote if they're running unopposed. And I'm like, I don't know who should have run for who should have run against them. It wasn't going to be me, but I never vote for somebody unopposed. And in California, we have all those props. I do think there have been a couple times where I've been so confused, because sometimes these propositions, and, in some states they have measures, the ways that they're worded, it's so confusing, because sometimes if you vote yes, you're saying no to something. And so there have been a couple times where I'm just like, I can't vote for that one because they made it so I couldn't understand.
or the way they're worded, like you said, they're worded really weirdly, and then you start thinking, am I really voting for what I want? And then you kind of forget who's paying for these props.
For me, California had a couple props where there was just no yes or no were both bad answers. Like our cash bail one, it's like getting rid of the cash bail system. Like that's something that a lot of people, a lot of liberals would like, but the system that was in place to replace it is even worse than the cash bail system. So either way, so I didn't vote on that one. There's a couple of those this year that.
Well, even Prop 22, it was the same thing for the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. I'm like, well, are they still allowed to be split off and be independent contractors if they want? But can they be employees if they want? Like, so even those things, I was still like not sure what would happen when that happens. And some of the judges, if I don't remember who it is, and usually I bring about, but if I forget, it's like I don't remember all the judges. I'm not going to just vote for somebody's name just because I like their name. You know, it's like, so a lot of those I leave blank. But to Sam's point is, however, a lot of people do just vote for president. And if it was something
especially a lot of young people,
right, and they hated Trump or whatever, they were going to go out and make sure they voted for Biden, and they didn't go down ballot. And that's been an issue with Democrats, like you're saying, Tamara, especially younger Democrats and younger people, is they don't go and vote those down ballot races. And as we say, the closer to home is the closer down to the bottom of the ballot, or the things are going to affect you on a daily basis. And it's a shame. And so that doesn't mean that it's necessarily any kind of fraud. It's that people would just vote for president and walk out the door, and that's it. And you can vote however you want. So you can just go in and vote for the senator if you want and walk out the door. There is no rule that says you have to fill out your ballot from top to bottom completely, you know, and that's a shame because people really should, but you have that right to go in and just vote for who you want and who you don't. And clearly there are a lot of people this year, and we haven't seen this in a long time, that did split their tickets as well. They came in and they voted for Joe Biden because they did not like Donald Trump, but they still were Republicans or leaning right independents that still voted for Republicans further down the ballot. And that's why you saw Susan Collins still got a win in Maine by a pretty good amount, but then Joe Biden won handily out of most of the districts there in Maine. And you saw that in a lot of other states as well.
Well, and that's I think the thing that your actual dyed-in-the-wool MAGA generation people just can't understand is just how reviled that man is. And I was talking to a friend earlier today. A lot of the policies he doesn't have a problem with. And he was from Indiana. So he always liked Mike Pence, so, but you have a lot of people who just didn't like him and liked him less and less. And it's, the way that a lot of conservatives on social media that I follow will boil it down to is that, like, oh, everything with liberals just comes down to Orange Man bad, and it's like it starts there, but it's like it's also he's surrounded by people that they just trust less and less, and I think that that's where the concern is, and you have your organizations like Republican Voters Against Trump, who really did split their ticket because they feel like 4 more years of President Trump is going to damage conservatism and the party so much that there won't be anything left for them to recover in 2024. What were you going to say, Tamra?
It's the conservatives that are always like, you can't trust the media. You can't trust the media. If I have a complaint with the media, it's that there's not enough focus on what America has done to these people in detention centers at the border. These are human beings that we are treating in such inhumane conditions. And this is America's crime. I mean, when you see footage of the conditions that these people are kept in detention centers, I mean, it is gut-wrenching. It is horrific. So for the party that is all about family values and the children, we took people's children away from them for no other crime other than crossing the border illegally. And they, then they come back, well, Obama did it too. And I always say, like, no, he didn't. But you know what? For the sake of argument, let's say that he did. Why are you okay with it? Like, it's still a horrific thing to do. So I wish that the media had. I mean, I can't believe it is on the tip of my tongue immediately. If I have any conversation with a conservative, we took human beings, we took their children away and put them in unlivable conditions. We did that as Americans, and the Republican Party supports that. And you're okay with that because you don't want to pay an extra $100 in your medical premiums? Like, are you kidding me? I feel like it in the future, the history is going to look back on what we've done to these illegal immigrants, and it's just I don't see how anybody dare say that they're for family values and then support what ICE is doing at the borders.
Yeah, no, I think that that's an issue that is important to a lot of people, and it depends on where they rank it in the grand scheme of things. I think pre-COVID that was a much higher concern. I think the handling of that was, I mean, you had a lot of polling that talked about how COVID was the main concern, which of course immediately translates into why there were so many mail-in voting for Biden and why it's so lopsided. In terms of these lawsuits, you had a lot of states now filing, basically trying to tell Pennsylvania how to go about their business. And I don't know, to me, conservatism was always very important in states' rights and how the federal government should stay out of their business. But they're very actively telling states that they don't know how to count votes. And no, it's the New York Times, and I know that it's the failing New York Times, but the New York Times did actually reach out to voting officials in all 50 states to ask about voter fraud. And I do believe 4 of them didn't respond, but then they spoke to other officials or got public comments. And so I think it's the front page of tomorrow's New York Times. And I know not a lot, but there are people out there that might not trust that. But all they did is they asked questions of people and then reported it, which is the way it's supposed to work. And I know it always doesn't work that way on either side. But in this case, that's what they did. And in all 50 states, everyone's saying there are not widespread voter irregularities. And people have gone through on Twitter. I was meant to mention this earlier. And they've broken down a lot of these things and we looked into this and we looked into that. And, we've found some of these things to not be true. There's the guy who signed the sworn affidavit. And then after 2 hours of questioning, mentioned that he faked the whole thing. And I guess he said he got paid $130,000. So, I think it was a postal worker, so he said that he was involved in it. And you have the lieutenant governor of Texas who's offering up to $1 million for.
You're frozen.
Reports.
Offered $1 million for what?
Voter.
It's like translating.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just talk for a second, and I'll bring them back in a second. Just because, so the lieutenant governor of Texas offered.
Christian, we're not getting any of this.
And we said and calls. So
Christian.
Trying to not get that basically. Yeah.
I don't think you can hear me.
Still, well, see,
we're not getting any of. We're not getting.
No, I hear you fine. So you're not getting me either, Scott?
No, I'm getting you now, but you were in and out. So
I get me, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit.
Anyway. So anyway, that's what I was referring to, is the voter hotline, the voter fraud hotline, and that we're not really seeing instances of it. What are you hearing in those respects? And I'll bring Tamra back in and I'll.
I'm like, because there is not fraud. That's what you're not hearing, because fraud is not a widespread thing. The only fraud that is going on is the fraud of everybody saying there's voter fraud. It's just not a thing at all. And
or any more than a normal election. In fact,
No.
it's I mean, every election,
Yeah.
there's always a little bit of fraud, but they even said that this election, there's less fraud than normal because of the extra attention that was given for instructions on how to do mail-in ballots, since that was just the first time we've had to do these different voting methods.
Yeah, it is so minuscule that it's not even worth discussing, because you just bring more attention to that, and that's what they want you to say, is just keep talking about the fraud, because there is not. And I've had Republican friends of mine that have gone and said, "Oh, what about when you move away to and your other ballot still goes back to your home in Florida, for instance?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but first of all, you'd have to consider that. I guess, yes, technically, I could fly back to Florida and vote, but just the likelihood of being able to mail in your ballot or whatever, and that wherever you move to, that whoever has to be at the other place that you lived at, and then you have to all go in the scheme together to now get that one vote in. I mean, all of that is just not even very realistic, and you'd have to be either pretty well off or well connected to be able to do something like that. And other people were saying they got someone else's ballot, and so yeah, they technically could. They could vote on that person's behalf, but at some point that person's going to say, "I didn't vote," or "didn't match up." So there's a lot of other things that would happen. They're just not realistic. And again, someone voting for a stranger's ballot that got sent to their house is putting their own self at risk for severe punishment. So most people are not going to do that.
Isn't it actually a felony?
Yeah. So people are not going to just go out and do this in the type of numbers that are even just realistic to even give this any credence that it is a thing that is happening.
Yeah. Let's be honest. No one loves Joe Biden so much that they want to go to jail for him.
Well, exactly. And also it's hard enough to get people to vote in general. To go out and vote for themselves, let alone now add and fraudulent
depending on what you believe, except for maybe Hunter. Maybe Hunter would go to jail for him. But anyway, to what you were saying, Scott, I was registered. I might still be registered in New York. I haven't lived there in 17 years. But within the first few years that I had lived in California and I was registered, I moved everything over here. I know I was still registered because I got a summons for jury duty.
I did too in Florida.
Yeah, I had to send them I actually had to fax them a copy of my driver's license in California and be like, no, I won't be showing up, but thanks. So you have some of those.
What's that?
I know, right?
It's what TikTok used to be, the fax machine. No, I kicked myself out. I feel like I'm just asking for it by putting my camera back on, but we'll see what happens. It's weird because the Wi-Fi had been working really well the last few times we did it down here. Because when I'm upstairs, I can do it with the actual Ethernet cable, and that's also like the old version of TikTok. But anyway, so there's so these are all questions that I think a lot of people have the day in court if you want. I think that, by the way, I think the GSA, the Government Services Administration, I do think that they started letting the George W. Bush transition team set up in an office and start working before Gore conceded. I do remember that. But I guess it has only been a week. But at the same time, you can't be mad that President-elect Biden is taking calls from world leaders. You can't be upset that he's doing that because they're not letting him, do the other things. They're not letting him actually set it up. So I think that the lawsuits are playing out in a way that it's mostly just to gum up the works a little bit. You have questions about what will happen with the electors. If because even in 2016, you had a couple of faithless electors who did not cast electoral votes for Donald Trump. I believe there were 2. So you have it. It happens. I think that the Supreme Court is not interested in this at all because there's no level that they feel like they need to weigh in on. And just to shift topics briefly, John Roberts would like to never have Obamacare presented to the Supreme Court again. What he said today was Congress really needs to work on this themselves. They need to figure it out.
Yep.
You should stop coming to us with this.
It's like a parent that's just had it with the kids and is just like, you guys figure it out
yourself.
Go to the room,
yeah.
draw a line down the middle of the room. You stay on your side. You stay on your side.
Yeah, and look, it's and you're having, it was Kavanaugh and somebody else, I forget, another conservative judge, feels like they're also inclined to be able to it was Alito, right? Also, they're both able to isolate the mandate from it, like Roberts did. So I think it's more that they don't want to rule on it because they're annoyed. It's almost like but it would be very impressive for any of these legal challenges to reach the level of the Supreme Court, because they're immediately getting thrown out. The lawyers arguing in favor of them don't seem to have faith in what they are, because they're making the points that, well, there were no Republican observers there. And I already mentioned this. And it's like, yes, they were. And your argument might be that they were too far away, which I've heard. So you can argue that point, but it's like, okay, but they were there. So that's, so there should be some degree of concern with that happening. But I think that there's sort of the wider level where you're starting to see people getting a little bit more concerned. And Charlie Potatoes had this a while ago. Say what you want about Trump. He didn't start any wars, civil not included. If the recount happens and votes land in Trump's favor, there will be civil war. I don't like predicting those two words, civil war, but I do think you have people that get upset when the popular vote and the electoral college don't match up. But when the popular vote and the electoral college go the same direction, were you to try and overturn that, I don't think they could build a big enough wall around the White House. I just don't think it's possible. And I don't quite, I don't know. If Toby and Roland Emmerich want to make that movie where that happens, they're the guys who did Independence Day. Great, make a movie of it. I don't want to see what that's like if that happens. And I don't know, because you have people who you wonder if they're humoring President Trump for politics because they can't afford to have him badmouth them. It didn't seem to hurt, if Ben Sass at least, but you have a few things that particularly today you had people were concerned by, and this is what I wanted to talk to all of you about. So the Secretary of Defense, Esper, was fired. The Government Services Administration won't sign off on the transition team. So then you had a top Pentagon policy official fired, Defense Department intel officer fired, Chief of Staff to the Defense Secretary fired, this giant wall around the White House. Trump continues to not concede. Mike Pompeo says he made a joke about the transition to the second Trump administration, which, if he did say it as a joke, President Trump didn't take it that way. And you had Attorney General Barr meeting with Mitch McConnell, and you had the CIA director meeting with Mitch McConnell. So when you have all those things happen,
3 cases of COVID.
Yeah. So you have all those things happening, and also it brings up what got turned into a song. But Arsenio Hall used to talk about the things that make you go, that's a lot of things that could add up to something really bad. And I don't like to predict those kinds of things, but you realistically have to look at it and you're like, the people that have been appointed in those positions are not your independent thinkers. They are definitely all of your yes men. And Scott, I don't think that this is, I don't think this is DEFCON 5. Five, the higher numbers are the worst ones. But do you see all of that, and do you have any thoughts about what it could mean? Is it just a show of what little force President Trump still has, what do you think when you see all of those things congealing together?
Well, and don't forget, they also were putting in together Trump's budget for February as well.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, and you know what? I forgot. Mike Pence said that he looks forward to continuing to work with everyone as the president of the Senate, which he believes he will be. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, again, part of it is playing into the bigger game here of like, oh, we're going to recount and these lawsuits are going to go through and the fraud is going to be admitted. And then all of a sudden, he's going to win. But it's part of his tactic. And again, it's just so idiotic that everyone still continues to fall behind him, like even Mitch McConnell. Like, great, if you want to do the recounts because the votes are within the legal margin of error where you can do that, go for it. It's not really going to change anything, and we've seen that time and time again. But by wasting everybody's time here, by claiming that you're going to win and making everyone be in your fantasy world here that you're going to win, and then you have Republicans that are too scared that are elected to stand up to him, even though he's going to be gone, because they're so afraid of his rabid base that they're going to send somebody in the primary to the right of them that they're going to lose, or they're afraid, he's going to come back in 2024 and run again. So they don't want to do anything, and it's just so idiotic to keep playing into this fantasy. But when you see the people that are appointed by him too, they're afraid they're going to be fired. There was the talk that even Bill Barr was going to be fired at one point. And again, I don't know why they care at this point, because he's out in a little over 2 months. But you should hope to see that some of these officials that are appointed by him would be able to stand up a little bit more, and not continue to play in this fantasy game. But that's where we're at right now, because they don't want to upset him and in turn upset any of his rabid base. Because again, Mike Pompeo has aspirations to run for higher office at some point, and I even believe that George W. Bush, which would have really helped, like a Cindy McCain endorsement did in Arizona. I really believe that George W. Bush was too afraid to say anything that, hey, I'm voting for Biden in Texas, because he's still afraid that maybe Jeb is going to run again at some point in 2024. And he's like, we don't want to upset this crazy base. So that everyone sort of continues to play into this game because they're very afraid of these voters, instead of going by principle and character, knowing that once Trump is gone, yes, he won't be gone permanently, but those voters will move on.
Well, and whether Jeb runs or not, I mean, that family has more aspirations. I mean, I know there's a George P. Bush, in there too. So, if your name is George Bush, I think you get to be president. It's just the way it works, So, Tamra, when you start to hear about all of those things, it's easy to go on the spiral and start to think about what it could mean. And I'm wondering what you think when those things all start to add up basically on the same day.
I think the way that cronies work, and all of these people are Donald Trump's cronies. The way that cronies work traditionally in a schoolyard is that when there's a new leader, somebody else is in power, all the cronies go to that person. And not that these Republicans are just going to fall in line with Biden, but they are going to, as soon as there is a transition of power, they are going to be, oh yeah, well, I did say from the beginning that there was no evidence of fraud. I mean, I feel like a lot of them are definitely going to go back on the claims once there is a transition of power, because that's what cronies do. That's what spineless people do. And maybe we will have Nancy Pelosi as the new president, at least for a day, at least for maybe a week.
I'll tell you what I think is more likely is Mike Pence is president so that he can pardon President Trump, because you can't count on Biden to pardon President Trump.
Right.
And by the way, Charlie Potatoes, Jeb's slogan for 2024 is Jeb with 2 exclamation points. I think you're right, by the way.
Yeah.
I think that it's easy to dismiss, but you have enough people that are noticing it and they're taking a long look, and you have different levels of concern. Look, I don't know what happens if let's even bring it to the theoretical, because I don't like to think about it too much in terms of it's like whatever you think about George W. Bush, it's infuriating when people say that he needed to knock down the Twin Towers so he could sell steel to China. So I don't like to think that anyone who's ever been an American president are capable of some things. So let's put it more hypothetical. The idea that an ousted president, in terms of the vote, would try and have the military support him, and then I don't know what happens. Like, do like state police in the other states stand their ground, and what kind of, I don't know where that goes. That's another thing that would be better off in a movie as opposed to on the evening news. So I think there is a level like that where you're going to have some people, probably not Ted Cruz, who I think if anyone respects Ted Cruz, I don't understand, because remember,
who are these people?
Well, they're there. I mean, look, more people voted for him than voted for Beto.
That's right.
So
that's right.
So
not out of respect, out of
no,
respect
that's
for
true.
Their
They were afraid of him because he looks like Count Chocula. But the simple fact was that President Trump alluded to the fact that Ted Cruz's father had JFK killed. And I'm almost positive, I was talking about this earlier today, I meant to look it up. I really think that President Trump called Ted Cruz's wife ugly once. And I'm fully willing to admit that that might be wrong. But
no,
he definitely said that his dad.
He said that.
Yeah. So how he could go out of his way to stand up for him, I don't understand. And that tells you probably everything you need to know about Ted Cruz, that he's willing to, put Trump over his own family, unlike George W. Bush, who puts his family over the interests of President Trump or even his own party. So anyway, the point I mentioned in bringing that up is that there are probably going to be some people who aren't saying much right now that at certain levels might be a little bit more alarmed. And I don't know that it gets to that point. I think you're having people who are saying, like, sure, they can have their day in court. Well, they want to have a recount. And there's been a lot of talk about recount in the past hour. There's people who have mentioned it in the chat. And I thought the most interesting comment on recounts came from Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, who was recalled multiple times, went through a couple of recounts. And he made the point that your statewide recount sometimes might shift a couple hundred votes, but more often than not, it shifts closer to 0 votes. So, when you have your 537 vote differential, certainly worth doing the statewide recount. But some of these are outside of the margin of error where they have the automatic recount. Now, it can be requested, and then, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong. Would the Trump campaign have to pay for a recount? Like if Pennsylvania doesn't want to do a recount and they don't have to by law, then the Trump campaign has to pay for it, right?
Right. And that's, again, probably why he's asking not only to retire his debts, which we know he doesn't have any money left in his campaign, but to be able to pay for these things, because you're absolutely right. If it's out of the margin of where a recount would automatically be triggered in the state, then the candidate that has decided to request it is therefore responsible to pay for it. So yes, that means they'd be paying for it again in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They've talked about Arizona. Georgia's actually getting close, to be honest, of being out of the automatic recount as well, because now I think Biden's sitting north of 12,000 votes. So as these numbers continue to come in, I mean, his numbers, it's going to be quite interesting to see. But Arizona may end up being tighter, and we saw those numbers so much higher for Biden election night, but Arizona may be closer than Georgia even. So it's quite remarkable to see the numbers really continue to go up in Georgia. So they're almost out of the range of the automatic recount, but they probably will do it because, again, they've got the Republican Secretary of State, the Republican governor, it's a Republican state. But even they have said, like, look, the voting has gone without a hitch. It's been smooth. There's no fraud. And so I think a lot of, and we've said this before in this podcast, that a lot of these elected officials, that is their job, and they're passionate about it. They love it. They have, they're proud of what they do, and they don't want to look like an asshole by allowing fraudulent things to happen on their watch. So, for them to make sure that they're ensuring that their votes go well in their state goes beyond the political party. It is
right. Let's make
beyond
sure
a
that
partisan
we don't
issue.
have this happen every single election cycle from now on.
This is exactly. This is their job, so they take it very seriously. So it is an affront to them, even if it's someone from the same party accusing a state of having fraud when it comes to their voting, because that is what they do. And so I think that's part of the issue there, is that Donald Trump can ask for all these recounts, and I saw Scott Walker's comment on that, and I saw his tweets. But you're right; it's really not going to shift anything, and we've seen that going back in previous elections. It really does not change anything. It's just to ensure that there wasn't any issues anywhere across the board when you have all that happening. That's really what it comes down to, and it just gives the confidence that yes, these numbers are correct.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think. Tamra, do you try to keep yourself from going into worst case scenario territory? Because I think that everybody's mental health got better on Saturday. Not everybody, you know what I mean. There's a lot of people who it did get better, and I don't think they're ready to let go of. A lot of people took a big breath that day, a deep breath, and
I haven't had I've been pretty optimistic for the last month, I'd say. Like, okay. I have a friend who has been like leading up to election day, like stocked up on food and toilet paper, just like people did at the beginning of the pandemic, thinking that there was going to be this huge, I don't know, insanity in the streets and stuff like that. And I'm just like,
I do think if Trump had won, I think you would have had more unrest. And I'm talking about winning popular vote and electoral votes. If that had happened, I do think that there's a reason why a lot of cities were boarding up windows and things, and it wasn't for a celebration. The one outside of the White House where people were singing YMCA because that's what President Trump had been playing at his rallies. That's nowhere near as funny as Four Seasons Total Landscaping, but that was good. That's a nice troll. It's a solid A+ troll. And the fact that, President Trump had to see all of that when he returned to the White House. It's like he could pretend he didn't, but it was all there, So I think the next week is interesting. I think the next month really is where you still have questions. Votes are still being counted, so you can't worry about certifying them. But I think that you have a majority of people that have been asked, whether in either party, do they think that Joe Biden won? I think it's about 75%. And I think it's a slightly smaller number. It's a larger number that think even if he didn't win, he'll still be sworn in on January 20th. And I think Donald Trump is one of those people who is 100% sure that Joe Biden will be sworn in on January 20th. I think Donald Trump knows that he will not be president anymore. But that brings up what Storage Yard Resident mentions. Trump 2024. And I don't like to wish ill on anyone, including President Trump. He's not going to still be around in 2024. I'm sorry.
I think it's going to be Don Jr. 2024, but not.
Yeah. Well, if there's ever anybody who needs to make sure that he doesn't leave his laptop at a repair shop, it's Don Jr. But allegedly. But actually, no. I mean, because he just shares his pictures of trophy killings or whatever. I heard someone call this campaign the Antiques Roadshow. That's pretty funny, Charlie Potato. In any case, yeah, look, there's the idea that whether or not President Trump would run again in 2024, his endorsement, somebody that he has chosen. I was thinking about this. If you rank them in order, I think Ivanka is your most viable candidate. I think Don Jr. could do well. I think Eric Trump should not run for city dog catcher. Earlier today, he sent out a tweet letting Minnesota to know to go out and vote today on November 10th. Now, look, anybody who has Twitter knows you can set tweets for in the future, and that's probably what happened. But he still told people to go out and vote today, specifically in Minnesota. Eric, Eric might want to put an exclamation point after his name. Maybe that'll help. Anyway, I do think there's more to digest, and I think we're still some twists and turns away from where any of this might go. I think that we'll talk soon, probably as soon as next week. We'll figure it out. But until then, Tamra, where do people find you?
Oh, I think you can find me on TikTok at Hey Tamra.
And Scott Moore, where can people find you?
You can find me at S-Man80 right here.
S-Man80 right there. And you can find me at Christian DMZ right here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you're on the Blackcast YouTube channel, which if you subscribe to, you'll always know when this show is back. And also our shows on Marvel movies, Star Trek Discovery, and yes, The Mandalorian as well. I'm as much a nerd about everything. It's very consistent, all the stuff that I'm interested in. Final thought from Sam. The MAGA movement isn't going away anytime soon. No, 70 or 71 million people voted for it. It's not going anywhere. It's very viable. And if Republicans try to discount it, there will be a third party. So if you try to ignore that, that's a problem. And I think
that's what's going to happen. Trump's going to come back like Theodore Roosevelt in 1912.
There you go.
Bull Moose Party all over again.
We'll talk about all. I love the name Bull Moose Party, so I might vote for a Bull Moose candidate. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Follow us on social media. I will let you know the next time we have a new episode coming up. But thanks to Tamra, thanks to Scott, thanks to everybody in the chat. And Sam points out, of course, there's the original Blackcast on the Blackcast YouTube channel. Thanks, Sam. BLADTCAST.com. That's where you go for all your Blackcasting needs. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.